Man, listen. Man, I'm your host, Brian Burns. We have the pleasure here today with the Honorable Colin Allred. Give it up, Colin Allred.
Good to go. Good to go.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Good to see you.
Same here. So here in this podcast, what we talk about is real men, real conversation, real healing. Awesome. So today, earlier we filmed Big Bink's Break Room podcast and an interesting discussion on football, legal system, January the 6th, a number of things. So if you want to check that out, go to MediaRoom360.com, MediaRoom360.com. But I kind of want to just interject in there. Along your path, you experienced a lot of bumps and bruises.
Yeah. Whether
Whether it was injury, whether it was that day of the Nationals Capitol on January the 6th,
Yeah.
a lot of adversity. Talk me through, like, how's that shaped you into what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it started kind of from birth because, I never met my father. I was raised by a single mother, and my mom was a public school teacher, and she had all the stress that accompanies having to be the sole breadwinner and raising a young crazy boy and all that stuff. On top of that being, I'm biracial, and so we looked different from each other. We had different experiences out in the world. People would be asking her, who are you with this child for, and things like that. And so I had this experience of always sort of feeling like I was having to overcome something, right? And even in my NFL path, I went undrafted. And I was supposed to be drafted. Like my report that they had put out on me said that I was somebody who was in the range of being probably likely to be drafted, but I didn't. And it's funny because I kind of feel like I was undrafted in life, right? And so I always feel like there, but for the grace of God go I, and that I went to public schools here. We never had any money, but I had some abilities and I had some people around me who helped kind of give me a shot. Mm-hmm. And then ever since then, I feel like I've been trying to give it back. And so when I got hurt in the NFL, it wasn't as traumatic as you might think. And I think I heard a quote once that said that athletes die twice. They die once when their athletic career is over, and then once when it's the final, And so I kind of experienced that death of that dream and of that lifestyle and of that drive. You're in the Army, you know this, that kind of feeling of knowing every day what you're going to do, what you're going to wear, who you're going to talk to, and then all of a sudden you don't, and you're just a free agent, right? But I felt like it wasn't as traumatic as it might have been because I had this plan of I was going to go to law school. I knew what I was going to do next. I was going to try and give back. But along the way, I've been knocked down a few times, right? And I do feel like I've come back stronger from that. I mean, just to be honest with you, I ran for Senate in the last election against Ted Cruz. Tried as hard as I possibly could, did everything I possibly could. Went at one point 5 weeks without seeing my kids. Like, did everything I could. But we lost. Mm-hmm. And then you got to pick yourself up after that, right? And so, I think for me, I don't try and act like I'm not going through it. I do go through it. But I try and have something else that I'm going to do next. And that's what usually keeps me going, is what's the next project? What's the next hill to climb? Even when I fail on one, I don't consider that to be a final failure, right? And I think that's helped me. And I have some teammates who I played with who didn't have something that they did next because they had enough money they didn't need to. Mm-hmm. And some of them are really struggling. And I do think that purpose is there for many reasons, but part of it also is that it gives you an organizing structure for your life, right? That you're not just floating from one thing to the next. It's not true that anything could happen. No, you're going to contain it within these parameters so you can drive forward.
So if you could just talk to me about, so you from Dallas,
right,
from
born
the
and
city.
raised.
So can you talk to us about the importance of knowing what's going on in your community and having a voice and standing up in that?
Yeah, and I do think that what I've seen is that this has been something that I've seen more women involving themselves in our community, right? Saying, I'm going to go march. I'm going to go knock on doors. I'm going to be part of a campaign. I'm going to be a part of the PTA. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. and some of it is historical. But I think partly it also is that for many men, I think that we believe that that's not a space for us now, and that civic engagement, engagement in your community, that's for someone else to do. And I just couldn't disagree more, because I think that there's certain masculine virtues of protecting and providing, that in order to do those things, you have to also take that beyond your own home and expand it to your community, right? And I would not be here were it not for several men who took an interest in me, because I didn't have a father who I knew.
Yeah.
And so I had my uncle, I had coaches. One coach, my high school coach, he texted me this morning, like we're still talking, who are constantly there to kind of be an example, but also a guide. And part of that example is being involved in what's going on around you. And the way we do that in our society, ultimately, is going to include voting, right? It's going to include at some point voting in your local elections, voting in your state elections, voting in your federal elections, because those are the people who are going to be elected, who are going to make decisions about you and your family.
For sure.
So why not be involved in who's picked, right?
Yeah.
And when I used to do voting rights work, I would go register voters, and some of the hardest conversations I would have would be with black men about why should I even give this a shot? Why should I even care? Because there's a feeling that nothing's going to change. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. I think it's a well-earned belief, right? But I also think that, as I said, part of our responsibility in trying to be leaders and trying to provide for our family, for our community, is to help shape who's going to be making these decisions as well.
Can we talk about adversity real quick?
Yeah.
And one of the big things that's happening right now is the Voter Rights Act.
Yeah.
And that's adversity within itself. Could you talk me to that?
Yeah.
On how your stance and how'd you stand up and
yeah.
Can you talk through
Yeah,
that?
so I was a voting rights lawyer after my NFL career. So I went to law school and I decided to do voting rights. And the biggest thing was I didn't really care who people voted for. I just wanted them to vote, right? And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was really the main reason why we have this kind of diverse democracy that you see today, right? Why Barack Obama was elected, right? Why I was elected to Congress. Why Eddie Bernice Johnson and Jasmine Crockett were elected in Dallas. Why Barbara Jordan was the first black woman from the South elected to Congress. It was the Voting Rights Act. Before that, there was almost nothing. In fact, after Reconstruction, we went 72 years without a black U.S. representative from the South, right? And then this law was passed that then allowed us to then participate in elections, and we see all these big changes. And folks should know that the Supreme Court just struck down the last remaining kind of pillar of the Voting Rights Act. It is effectively dead at this point. And so what we're seeing is immediately Southern states are moving to try and destroy electoral opportunities, meaning districts that would allow black or brown communities to elect a candidate that they want. So Tennessee just got rid of their only black district in Memphis. They just did that. Here in Texas, we've gone from when I left Congress in 2025 in January, we had 6 black representatives out of 38. If I'm not successful in my runoff election later this month, we'll go down to 2. So even if I am successful, that'll just be 3. So we already have cut that in half. And this is the state with the most black people of any state in the country, right? And so I think we should recognize that our rights are actively under attack. It might feel like everything's just processing as normal, but it's not. This is a totally new world that we're in right now, and we got to respond to it. And so we need a new movement and a new feeling of crisis to respond to it. And I think, men, we have a really important role to play in that. All you got to do is look back at the last civil rights movement to see that example.
So you faced a lot. Through it all, you've always, like Drewski says, standing on business.
That's right. Try to.
And on the topic of race, Talrico, recently made a comment behind closed doors or whatever, calling you a mediocre black man. Like, what does that mean to you? And but what does that mean to you? And how do you respond to it to get a proper reaction?
Yeah.
keeping all those sensitivities in
Yeah,
mind?
and to be honest with you, I'm sort of moved on from it because I feel like I said what I had to say. I'll stand on business when I need to, but my broader goal is to make sure that we elect people who will help me restore what's been taken away and create opportunities that have not been there. And so I want to make sure that we win this Senate race, regardless of what anybody says about me, right? Not because of me, but because there's a kid out there, just like us, who's counting on us to deliver for them, right? They're counting on us to be big men and to be men who put them first, right? And not their ego and not anything else. And so I want to make sure we win that race. I want to win my race. I want to make sure that people feel like being involved can make a difference, right? Because not just Republicans, but the status quo depends on us not being involved. It depends on us deciding to check out. And to be honest with you, when I was playing football, I didn't care that much about voting. I mean, my mom had to make me vote, basically, right? It just didn't, it wasn't that important to me at that time, because especially because election season was always during football season. But, I was young and I felt like this is not for me. It absolutely is, right? And one of my favorite quotes is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? If you're not sitting there helping decide what's going to be done, they're dissecting you, right? And so, and your family and your community. And so I think what we have to do is have a reaction election in this one. Because what's happened here in our country is so crazy and so radical, and it is not what I think people want. But our way of showing that in this country isn't by going to the streets and fighting everybody, isn't by starting a civil war, it's by voting, right? As John Lewis said, it's the most powerful nonviolent tool that we possess, is the vote. So we got to use it.
Question: how does as black men respond when things aren't going like properly out in the community? How should we respond?
Yeah. Listen, I think that we have a well-earned cynicism about this whole project, right? Because for black men, I think in particular, get out and vote Democratic, vote for Obama, right? And things are going to get better. And then it can feel like it hasn't, especially if you're somebody who is working, doing everything right. You feel like you still can't get ahead, and you're still also facing discrimination, frustration, and I feel that deeply. That we are not just in need of somebody to go in office and deliver incremental gains. That we have some serious demands that we need to make, right? And I think that we failed, to be honest with you, in the first 2 years of the Biden presidency, when we had a Democratic Congress, and George Floyd had just happened. And we didn't pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which would have helped reform policing in this country. And we didn't pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would have reshaped voting rights in this country. And then we said, well, vote for us again, even though we didn't do it, right? And I think we have to have accountability around that. But it can't be, the accountability can't be to say, I'm going to withdraw. Because then the status quo and the people who don't want us to have those rights, they will benefit from that. I think the accountability has to say, we demand that you actually deliver what you said. And I always think about MLK's last speech in Memphis, where he said, all we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper. And he says, if I lived in China, if I lived in Russia, I wouldn't expect to be treated very well. But somewhere I read, and it goes on this riff about the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, and he's talking about why they should have the right to protest and to march for a better country. We still have to demand that from our country, right? That we live up to those founding documents. We still haven't done it. In the Declaration itself, where we say all men are created equal, we still haven't lived up to that. But what I think we should recognize is that we are making progress, and that we're trying to perfect our union, and that our opportunities now sitting here in 2026 are so much better than what John Lewis faced in 1964. And this is not centuries ago. This is within lifetimes of people who we know and love, right? And that they've seen the impossible happen. Barack Obama rise to the presidency, right? They've seen corporate boardrooms taken over where they become more diverse. We still have a lot more work to do, but we've seen some of this progress. And now what we have to do is not let it go backwards, and I think have a plan for what does the next civil rights movement look like. Because we've been living off of the advancements of our grandparents and the struggles that they went through in the 60s and 50s. For 60 years, we've not really had a subsequent push. And I think we got to re-engage now. And Trump, in some ways, you can say Trump's a wake-up call. And say, okay, we realize how bad it could get, and we realize how big the window could get. So now let's re-engage. And for black men, I can't think of anything more important, whether it's to provide or protect, or being able to look to the future.
Man, I appreciate that. Just in closing, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, listen, I really appreciate you for talking about mental health and the importance of being a black man and being able to do it in a way that can be an example. Mm-hmm. Just really quickly, I'll tell you, I was the first member of Congress to ever take paternity leave. I took leave when my first son was born.
Man, that's important, bro.
And I didn't know I was the first. I wasn't planning on being the first. It was 2019. I mean, you think at some point nobody had taken leave, right?
That's crazy.
And I wrote an op-ed about how for men being around your babies when they're born, there's studies have shown there's benefits to the men themselves, to their spouses, and to their children, right? And that being involved in those early years builds that connection that is never then broken. And I want everyone to be able to have that opportunity. But at the very, very least, we have to recognize that there's something about fatherhood and being a man that is important, and that it should be celebrated. And as somebody who didn't know my father and who is a father now, it's the most important job I've got, right? It's the most, and my staff knows, everybody knows, if my two sons come first, and then everything else is after that, right? And that's, my proudest accomplishment isn't being in Congress, playing in the NFL, working for Obama. That's not my proudest accomplishment. It's being a good dad, right? And I want to keep doing that. But part of how and I honestly believe this, part of being a good dad is leaving a good country to them, that they can then become whatever they want to become in, and that they're not, looking at history books wondering what it was like when things were good, right? I can't do that. As a father, I can't leave that to my kids. And I think for black men in particular, this is part of our responsibility.
Hey, man, I appreciate that. The audience appreciates that. Hey, this is Man Listen. I'm Brian Burns. Thank you once again.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Good luck.